925 Mary.
What's up with 925 Adam? Halldale, Rosecrans.
911, what's your emergency?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of my series, Crafts and Crimes. Every week I post a new video of myself crafting while talking about a different true crime. This week I will be covering the case of the Scottish serial killer, Peter Manuel, also known as the Beast of Birkenshaw. Peter Thomas Anthony Manuel was born on March 13, 1927, in New York City, to Scottish parents, Samuel and Bridget Manuel. He was the middle of 3 siblings. He had an older brother and a younger sister. The family moved to Detroit, Michigan before returning to Motherwell, Scotland in 1932 when Peter was 5 years old. The family were very unsettled when they returned to Scotland and soon relocated from Motherwell to Coventry in 1937. Peter was 10 years old and did not settle well into English school life. He was tormented by his classmates for having an American accent, but otherwise was said to have had a happy upbringing. In 1938, he had his first brush with the law when he broke into a chapel and stole the collection box. Manuel spent the next 5 years on the wrong side of the law. During one break-in, with another boy, a local paper described the damage as, quote, of such enormity that words cannot adequately describe it. Cupboards and drawers had been ransacked and the contents strewn over the house. Crockery, dirtied by the youths, had been thrown about, eggs had been broken and ground into the carpets. Vases and bowls had been smashed, tablecloths destroyed, tins of foodstuffs thrown about and other tins emptied on the floor and ground into the carpets. Curtains had been torn down and windows broken, and the cover of the settee had been dirtied and torn beyond repair. This was a pattern that would repeat itself in his later crimes. Peter was constantly in and out of Borstals and approved schools during his youth. For anyone who doesn't know, a Borstal was a type of juvenile offenders facility in the UK, and they were run by the Prison Service and was intended to reform young offenders. Approved schools were modeled on boarding schools, making them easier to leave. The use of Borstals officially ceased in 1982 under the Criminal Justice Act, and in their place youth custody centers were established. When Peter was 15 years old, he committed his first act of real violence when he attacked a sleeping woman with a hammer after breaking into her home. After this incident, he was sent to Leeds prison for the first time. While in prison, his family moved back to Scotland after their Coventry home was destroyed by the German bombing during World War II. Peter also returned to Scotland after being released from prison. On February 16, 1946, Peter Manuel broke into a bungalow in the Sandy Hills area of Glasgow. While the police searched the house and began taking fingerprints, he hid behind a paneled wall in the loft. When Detective Constable William Munsey returned to the house to retrieve evidence that was left behind, he caught Manuel in the garden and arrested him. While out on bail for the break-in, Peter Manuel committed 3 assaults on women, including the rape of an expectant mother. For these crimes he was sentenced to 8 years in Peterhead Prison. During the trial, Manuel represented himself, and was actually complimented by the judge for his skilled defense. This was his first time in an adult prison, and Peter Manuel gained a reputation as a Walter Mitty-type character, who told lurid tales about his father dying in the electric chair in America. In reality, his father Samuel was a law-abiding citizen, and the closest he ever came to an electric chair was while working in a car factory in Detroit. He was released from prison in 1953, at age 26. On July 30, 1955, Peter was due to marry his sweetheart Anna O'Hara, but she refused to go through with the marriage. Some sources say that she broke off the engagement when Manuel refused to go to Mass, and others say it was because she found out about his criminal past. Regardless of the reasons, Peter went out and attacked 29-year-old Mary McLaughlin the same day O'Hara broke things off. McLaughlin was walking home alone when she was dragged into a field and sexually assaulted by Manuel. He then spent over an hour with Mary, telling her in graphic detail how he was going to decapitate her. She was able to escape Peter and would become his final victim to be able to testify against him. Peter Manuel stood trial and once again represented himself. During the trial, Mary McLaughlin testified that she felt that he got great pleasure from seeing the fear in her eyes. Unfortunately, he once again had a good defense and this time was acquitted for the crime. The chief detective on the case was once again William Muncie, which angered Manuel, and from then on he would send birthday and Christmas cards to Muncie. On January 2, 1956, 17-year-old Anne Nealons went out dancing with her friends but failed to return home. Her parents, thinking she was staying with friends, reported her missing 2 days later. Instead, she had been stalked by Peter Manuel onto an East Kilbride golf course. There he raped and bludgeoned her to death with a length of iron bar. Her body was discovered on January 4th, and this began the biggest manhunt Scotland had ever seen. The first officers at the scene found that her head had been smashed in. They also saw the marks of running feet in the mud, which indicated that she had run for her life for over 400 yards. Because he was a known sex offender, Manuel was questioned by the police but was given an alibi by his father, who claimed to be with his son at the time of the crime. Although Peter was later charged with the crime after confessing, the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. On September 17, 1956, the police were called to an address in Burnside where the bodies of Marion Watt, age 45, her daughter Vivienne Watt, age 17, and her sister Margaret Brown, age 41, were all shot to death in their beds. Peter Manuel was suspected, but when a search of his parents' home in Uddingston turned up nothing, they moved on. They suspected William Watt, Marion's husband, of committing the crime even though he was on a fishing trip at the time. An investigation was carried out to prove that Watt had driven 90 miles to his home and back to commit the crime, and that he had faked the break-in. The results of the investigation were inconclusive. A ferryman and another motorist claimed to have seen him on the day and even picked him out in an identity parade. As a result, William Watt was arrested and spent the next 2 months in jail. It was the same jail that Peter Manuel was in, for a break-in he committed 2 days before the murders of Marion, Vivienne, and Margaret. During Watt's time in jail, his lawyer Lawrence Dowdall began receiving letters from Manuel claiming that another inmate had confessed to the crimes. The letters revealed details of the case that the police had not made public, including that one of the Watt women had been shot twice in the head. Dowdall described Peter Manuel as, quote, "the most vicious psychopath it has ever been my misfortune to meet." The case against William Watt fell apart and he was released from prison 67 days after his arrest. It was believed that the ferryman who identified him had already seen William's picture in the paper and imagined seeing him when he couldn't describe Mr. Watt's car. The motorist admitted that he hadn't gotten a clear look either and identified Watt by the way he held his cigarette. While in Newcastle looking for work in 1957, it is believed that Peter Manuel killed 36-year-old taxi driver Sidney Dunn. Dunn's body was found on moorland not far from his abandoned cab. He had been shot in the back of the head and his throat slit. By the time Sidney Dunn's body was discovered, Peter was already back in Scotland, and with it being a different jurisdiction, he was never charged with the crime. Once Peter Manuel was in custody, an English coroner found him guilty, the evidence linking him to the crime being a button from his coat found on the floor of Mr. Dunn's cab. Although not everyone is sure that Manuel did commit this crime. He was in Newcastle for a job interview 2 days before the murder, but it is unclear whether or not he hung around for those 2 days. Witnesses claim the person who committed the crime sounded like a local, while others say the person was Irish, but Peter Manuel had a Scottish accent. On December 28, 1957, 17-year-old Isabel Cook went missing on her way to a dance at Uddingston Grammar School. While on her way home, she was stalked, raped, and strangled by Peter Manuel. He then buried her body in a nearby field. Her alarmed father, William Cook, reported her missing the next day, after she failed to return home from the dance. A major police search of the area found one of Isabel's shoes and her handbag, but no body. Her disappearance wasn't connected to Manuel until his arrest. William Munsey, now a detective chief inspector, was among the senior officers investigating Isabel's disappearance. During the investigation into the case, another family was discovered shot to death in a house in Uddingston. It was at this point the police realized that they had a serial killer on their hands. In the early morning hours of January 1, 1958, Peter Manuel broke into the house of the Smart family. He shot 45-year-old Peter, 42-year-old Doris, and 10-year-old Michael Smart to death. After the murders, he spent a week living in their home, eating the leftovers from their hogmanay meal, and even feeding the family cat. He stole some brand new banknotes that Peter Smart was keeping for a holiday, and the family car before dumping it nearby. Peter Manuel, at one point, even gave a ride to a police officer that was investigating the disappearance of Isabel Cook, telling the officers he thought the police were looking in the wrong place. Many of the investigators on the case were familiar with Peter Manuel, but there was little evidence to tie him to the murders of the Smart family. DCI Munsey remembered arresting Manuel 12 years earlier and how he had remained in the house after the break-in, but no one else saw the connection. The police finally received a break in the case when the £5 notes that Peter Smart had in his home began showing up in several East End Glasgow pubs where Manuel had been identified as spending them. On January 13, 1958, Peter Manuel was arrested and charged with the murders of the Smart family. When police searched Manuel's family home and discovered stolen property, Samuel was arrested for receiving stolen goods, because the items were found in his bedroom. Once Peter learned of his father being arrested, he requested a meeting with Inspector Robert McNeil. On January 15, Manuel made a deal with Inspector McNeil and Detective Inspector Tom Goodall that if they released his father, he would lead them to where he buried Isabel Cook's body and where he threw the guns into the River Clyde. This began a long series of confessions to the murders of Anne Nyland's, Isabel Cook, the Watt and Smart families. These 8 murders would make him Scotland's most prolific serial killer. The trial of Peter Manuel began on May 12, 1958 at Glasgow High Court. It lasted 14 days, and was the most documented trial in the history of the Scottish criminal justice system. In a move that astounded everyone there, he fired his lawyer 10 days into the trial and decided to represent himself. Peter claimed that William Watt had committed the murders and even called him as a witness. Watt had been in an accident a few days prior and was actually brought into the court on a stretcher. Manuel claimed that he only confessed to the crimes to get his father released. He made several wild claims during the trial, including that Peter Smart had gone on a spree and killed his family, and that Smart had given him a key to the house because he was a family friend. Peter Manuel was unable to convince the jury of his innocence. He was found guilty of 7 out of the 8 murders on May 26 after only 2 hours and 21 minutes of deliberation, and was sentenced to death. There wasn't enough evidence he murdered Anne Nyland's. While in prison, Peter confessed to additional murders that hadn't been connected to him, and it is believed that he is guilty of at least 15 murders total. On July 11, 1958, after a failed appeal, Peter Manuel was executed by hanging at Barlinnie Prison gallows. His last words are quoted as "Turn the radio up and I'll go quietly." Peter Manuel was buried on Barlinnie Prison grounds in an unmarked grave, and no one was allowed to attend the burial. He was one of the last people executed in Scotland. Opinions are divided about Manuel's mental state. Some said he displayed many of the classic traits of a psychopath, lacking empathy with his victims, showing no remorse and not accepting that what he had done was wrong. Those seeking to understand what drove Manuel to kill had to wrestle with some contradictions. He was someone who killed and raped women, yet doted on his own mother. He was cruel to animals but was devoted to the family dog. He couldn't maintain a relationship with a woman, but he considered himself as a Lothario. No one to this day knows why Peter Manuel turned from career criminal to serial killer or knows how many people he actually killed. One theory is that it was a personal vendetta against William Muncie, who sent him to an adult prison all those years ago. His victims were completely random and seem to have only been chosen to provoke the police inspector. Manuel went so far as to hand-deliver birthday cards to Muncie's house, making the hardened police inspector believe his own family was in danger. In 2016, there was a 3-part drama series on ITV about the crimes of Peter Manuel that focused on his relationship with William Muncie. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Crafts and Crimes. If you're interested in the things I'm crafting, please check out the links in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and comment below with what future cases you want me to talk about. Don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on any future uploads. I'll see you all next time.